If you come back, your blood will feed this land. In a time when greed scorched the West and honor was fading, one cowboy stood torn between two worlds, his people and the people who saved his life. This is the true story of Elias Boone and the fire that nearly burned Rio Seco to ash. True Wild West stories invite you to ride with us. Don't blink, it's about to begin. The late-season sun clung to the sky like a burning brand, painting the dry plains in blinding white and cruel gold. Dust rose with every clop of Ashfire's hooves, the red haze trailing Elias Boone like a ghost. His shirt clung to his back, soaked in sweat, and the herd behind him moaned with thirst. Rio Seco, a name that once meant dry river, was now the only trickle of life left in 50 miles. Elias had counted on it. His cattle had counted on it. But as he crested the ridge, the silver glint of water at the bottom of the ravine shimmered not with promise, but with warning. They were already there. 5 riders, proud silent, painted, spears upright like judgment. Elias tugged the reins gently. Ashfire halted without protest, snorting once. At the center stood Chayton, broad-shouldered, bare-chested under the sun, a single black feather trailing behind his left ear. He had the look of his father, the same eyes that once looked down at Elias half dead in the desert, the same silence that saved his life. But this silence was different. Elias dismounted slowly. He didn't reach for the rifle on his saddle, didn't even glance at it. The cattle behind him bellowed as the scent of water teased their cracked lips. "I ain't here to steal," Elias said, voice dry like the dirt under his boots. "Only to water the herd. They're dying, same as yours." Chayton didn't move. Elias took a step forward. The Apache behind Chayton shifted but didn't draw. "This land ain't marked. It's always been shared." Chayton finally spoke. "That water is the last breath of our mothers." Elias paused, his throat tightened. "I remember what your father did for me. I still carry that debt." "Then carry it away from here," Chayton said, eyes sharp as obsidian. "Take your beasts back to your valley." "They won't make it," Elias said softly. "I won't lie to you. I wouldn't be here if I had a choice." Chayton stepped forward now, spear still grounded, voice rising just enough to pierce the stillness. "This land doesn't belong to choices. It belongs to the bones buried beneath it. If you come again, the ground will drink more than water." Silence. Wind danced through the canyon, stirring dry leaves and old memories. Elias nodded once, not out of fear, but out of understanding. He turned, climbed back on Ashfire. The cattle moaned as he wheeled around. They would walk thirsty, and some would not make it. As the herd moved west, Elias took one last glance over his shoulder. Chayton hadn't moved. The warriors still stood, still silent, shadows cast long like warnings. A few miles down the trail, just as dusk bled across the sky, Elias crested a second ridge and stopped. In the distance, above Dry Creek, black smoke curled into the heavens like a clenched fist. Not cooking fires, not chimney smoke. Something was burning, and trouble was coming. The air inside the saloon was thick, part with sweat and whiskey, part with something unspoken. Outside, Dry Creek was choking under the dust of a long drought, but in here, It was drowning in tension. The fiddle screeched out a fast tune no one danced to, and every chair scrape felt like a pistol being drawn. Elias Boone stepped inside, pushing the saloon doors open slow. Eyes flicked his way, then just as quickly turned away. He walked across warped wooden floorboards toward the bar, boots thudding like war drums in a church. Behind him, the door swung again, louder. The man who entered didn't look like he belonged here, because he didn't. Harlan Fitch wore a black long coat, despite the heat, polished boots that had never touched manure, and a silver-tipped cane he didn't need. He moved like he owned every pair of eyes in the room. "Mr. Boone," Fitch said, voice like molasses poured over a blade. "We finally meet." Elias gave him a glance and a nod, nothing more. Fitch signaled the bartender with 2 fingers. 2 corn whiskeys. Neat. A moment later, the drinks clinked onto the bar. Fitch slid one toward Elias. "You're not from around here," Elias said. Fitch smiled. "No, but soon this town will be mine, in every way that matters." Elias didn't drink. He stared into the amber liquid like it held some secret code. "You know what's out there?" Fitch continued, voice dropping. "Gold veins, rich as a preacher's lies. Land ready to be tamed. Apache sitting on it like it's still theirs. All they need is a push." Elias didn't flinch. "A push means blood. Progress always does," Fitch replied smoothly. "But blood dries faster than regret." The room quieted further when the next man stepped in. Jeb Crowley. Meaner than a rattler. Uglier than sin. With a 6-shooter he could spin faster than most men could blink. He swaggered through the crowd like a wolf among sheep. Without a word, Crowley drew and fired into the ceiling. The fiddle stopped. So did every breath. "Just testing the air," he smirked. "Smells like cow piss and cowardice." Laughter followed, but nervous, short, and sharp. Fitch chuckled as if it were a rehearsed joke. "My associate, Mr. Crowley, he handles situations." "I handle things that get in the way," Crowley added, his eyes never leaving Elias. Fitch leaned in now, placing a small, worn pouch on the bar with a soft clink. The drawstring opened, revealing gold, real, raw, and heavy. "You help us guide this town toward its true destiny," Fitch said. "And there's more where that came from." Elias let the silence stretch. The room listened. Even the whiskey seemed to wait. "I ain't for sale," he said, "and neither is Dry Creek." Fitch's smile didn't fade, but something in his jaw tightened. "Pity. I thought you were smarter than that." Elias turned, leaving the drink and the gold untouched. He didn't need to hear more. As he stepped outside, the dry wind slapped his face, but it was almost a relief. Inside, Fitch remained still, his shadow cast long and sharp across the saloon wall like a creeping stain. Behind the bar, whispers began. "He said no. God help him. Man's got one foot in the grave." And up in the rafters, the bullet hole Crowley left smoked quietly, like a warning still hanging in the air. The church bell rang out, clear and sharp, cutting through the heat like a blade. It echoed off the dusty storefronts and the slumped shoulders of Dry Creek's people. But the sound brought no comfort that morning, only a reminder. Inside the small wooden chapel, light filtered through cracked panes of colored glass, painting the pews in fractured reds and golds. The altar was simple, a hand-hewn cross, a Bible older than the town, and a reverend who spoke not with fire, but with the weary warmth of a man
who had seen too much blood soak into soil. Reverend Malcolm stood in front of the congregation, what little of it remained. His voice, slow and measured, floated through the air like dust motes. "The land cries not for vengeance," he said, "but for mercy. Mercy is the only thing that leaves something behind after the storm." Elias Boone sat quietly in the back pew, hat in his hands, boots scuffed with trail dust. He hadn't planned on attending, but the sound of the bell had stirred something in him, something he couldn't name. Next to the pulpit sat Clara Malcolm, the Reverend's daughter. In her early 20s, she wore a modest dress, faded by sun and time, hair braided back with a simple ribbon.
Her eyes held a quiet defiance, like coals that never cooled. When the sermon ended, the sparse crowd shuffled out, murmuring polite thank yous without truly listening. Elias rose to leave as well, but Clara caught him with a soft voice. "Mr. Boone," she said, "you're welcome to join us for supper. The Reverend says no man should ride with an empty stomach, especially after fire and smoke." Elias hesitated, caught off guard. Then he nodded once. "I reckon I could sit a spell." They walked to the parsonage behind the chapel, a small cabin with a sloped roof and a porch that creaked under every footstep. Inside, the table was already set, thick slices of salt pork, fresh cornbread, and a pot of beans that steamed with quiet generosity. They ate slowly, Reverend Malcolm saying grace with bowed head and rough hands. For a moment, the world outside seemed farther away. Clara passed Elias a plate. "You rode in from the canyon, didn't you?" He looked up. "Word travels fast." "Not word," she said. "Smoke. It rose like thunder. Folks here felt it in their bones." Elias didn't answer. He didn't need to. That silence was broken when the door opened hard. Jeb Crowley stood in the frame, his spurs jingling like mockery. "Well, well," he drawled, stepping inside without invitation. "Didn't take you for the prayer type, Boone." Elias set his fork down. Clara stood from her seat. The Reverend remained seated, voice calm but firm. "You're interrupting supper, Mr. Crowley." Crowley grinned, eyes flicking between them all. "Reckon supper's over. I just came to hear the holy man tell us how love will save our hides when bullets start flying." Reverend Malcolm met his gaze. "Love doesn't stop bullets, but it decides who still has a soul when they're done flying." Crowley chuckled darkly. "That's so. Well, I'll say this. Prayers ain't never kept a man from getting his land taken, and they sure as hell won't stop Fitch." He turned to Elias, leaning in close. "Careful where you plant your feet, Boone. This town's about to split wide open." Then he was gone, boots stomping off the porch like thunder. Inside, the silence was heavier than before. Clara looked at Elias. He caught her eyes, and in them he saw a storm brewing. Not in the sky, but in the hearts of men. And storms never stayed still. The night pressed down heavy over the canyon, air thick like sweat on skin, unmoving. In the dark, a slow, steady beat pulsed across the stone, a buffalo-hide drum, deep and primal, like the heartbeat of the land itself. Elias Boone sat cross-legged just beyond the main fire, where the shadows clung tight to the rocks. The Apache camp was alive with movement. Dancers painted in ash and ochre moved in circles, bodies jerking in rhythm, eyes lost to something older than memory. The fire crackled, spitting embers that soared upward like spirits fleeing the earth. Behind the flames, Taza stood tall, his silver hair braided tight, chest bare beneath the night sky. He raised his arms, chanting in a language Elias didn't understand, but he felt it, like thunder beneath the ribs. A woman passed by, laying strips of deer meat over a spit. The smell mingled with the bitter smoke of burning sage. Somewhere a gourd rattled in a child's hand. Elias hadn't planned on coming back here. Not so soon, not so unsure. But the smoke rising from Dry Creek, the weight of Fitch's gold offer, Crowley's grin, none of it sat right. He needed answers that whiskey couldn't give. Chayton watched from the other side of the fire, not speaking, not smiling, just watching, like a wolf unsure whether to bite. Taza broke from the dance and came toward Elias, walking slow, purposeful. His face was worn like old stone, but his eyes were bright with firelight. "You remember this place," Taza said. It was not a question. Elias nodded. "You dragged me out of the sand, right over that ridge. Saved my life." Taza nodded. "And now the desert wants it back." Elias gave a tired smile. "Not if I can help it." They sat in silence for a while. Then Taza handed him a clay cup. Bitter herbal liquor burned down his throat, strong enough to erase doubt. Almost. Chayton joined them, kneeling across the fire. He didn't speak right away. His jaw clenched like stone ready to crack. "You bring danger," Chayton said, low and hard. "Wherever your boots land, trouble follows." "I didn't bring Fitch," Elias replied. "I didn't call Crowley. I'm trying to stop what's coming." Chayton snorted. "You're a white man. You try to stop one thing and start 10 more. Taza raised a hand, not to silence, but to temper. His blood once stained this ground. The old man said, "He earned a place at the fire." "That fire won't protect him," Chayton replied. "Not when the gold rushes in." Elias leaned forward. "You think I want your land? I'm not Fitch." "No," Chayton said, "but your shadow walks beside his." Silence again. Then Taza spoke, voice softer now, but colder. "Even a man who brings water can drown others. And your death, Boone, your death might feed this soil better than your life." The drumbeat paused, just a moment, but it felt like the earth had stopped breathing. The fire snapped. A dark bird, black as coal, burst from a tree above, wings slicing the silence as it flew low across the camp, circling once before vanishing into the night. Whispers followed, old tongues muttering omens. Chayton stood slowly. "Go back to your people, Boone. Warn them or bury them." Taza watched the fire, unmoving. Elias drank again from the clay cup. The liquor was bitterer now, and the night somehow darker. The flames licked the sky like the tongues of wild dogs, casting a hellish glow over Dry Creek's main road. Smoke rolled down the street in thick, choking waves, turning day into dusk. One of the small wooden cabins near the edge of town was ablaze, fire crackling through the walls like it was alive and furious. Elias Boone galloped in from the east, pulling hard on Ashfire's reins as he neared the crowd. Townsfolk stood in loose, panicked clusters, buckets in hand, but unsure where to throw them. Some yelled, others prayed, most just stared. Children cried, dogs howled. Elias swung down from his saddle before the horse had fully stopped. He didn't think, didn't speak, just ran toward the building where the screams came from. "Boone!" someone called. He didn't turn, He crashed through the smoke-filled doorway, heat slapping him like a punishment. Inside, the world was orange and chaos. He ducked low, coughed, and moved toward the sound. Then spotted the child, no older than 6, curled beneath a table as flames licked the rafters above. Elias grabbed the boy, shielding him with his body as he forced his way back out, stumbling through the smoke and heat. He burst into the open air, coughing hard, the boy pressed tight to his chest. The crowd gasped. A woman ran forward, shrieking the child's name. Elias handed the boy off without a word. That's when the voice came, calm and cruel. "Well, damn. Look who decided to be a hero." Elias turned to see Jeb Crowley standing in the middle of the road, hands loose by his sides, grin carved into his face like it had been nailed there. Around him stood half a dozen of Fitch's men, watching, waiting, amused. Crowley stepped forward, boots crunching through the scattered ash. "Tell me, Boone, you saving children now? That your new job? Or is it just that you like the applause?" Elias didn't answer. His eyes narrowed. His hand twitched slightly near his hip, but didn't drop. From the edge of the crowd, Clara watched. She hadn't meant to be there, but the smoke had drawn her like a siren. Her eyes met Elias's, and something inside her shifted. Crowley kept walking. "Fitch thinks you're a man of sense. I'm starting to think you're just another fool with a savior complex." Then, without warning, Crowley drew his pistol, fast, practiced, aimed directly at Elias's chest. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Someone screamed. But before a shot could ring out, a body threw itself between them. Reverend Malcolm. The old man stood firm, arms wide, voice booming above the crackle of the dying fire. "Put the gun down, Jeb," he roared. "You fire that weapon today, and you'll burn more than this house. You'll burn this whole town to ash." Crowley didn't move at first. His finger tensed on the trigger. Then, his eyes flicked past the reverend, saw the townsfolk watching. Even Fitch's men shifted uneasily. He lowered the gun, slow, deliberate, smiled like a man who still held all the cards. Reverend Malcolm turned to Elias, hand still raised in warning. Behind them, the fire hissed as someone threw the last bucket of water. Clara stepped forward, but said nothing. She just looked at Elias, like he was no longer just a cowboy passing through, but something more dangerous, or something worth believing in. Around them, whispers spread like smoke. "Boone's gonna bring trouble. He's standing in no man's land. He's between fire and flood." And in the silence that followed, Elias Boone felt it too. The line he'd been walking was gone. Now, he stood square in the crossfire. The wind tore across the plains like it had a message to deliver. It howled through the tall grass and rattled the loose boards of the old cattle shed. Dust swirled in little angry spirals, stinging the eyes and setting nerves on edge. Something in the air had changed, and it wasn't just the weather. Elias Boone sat by the fire, hunched low, poking of the bubbling pot of pinto beans he'd been simmering since late afternoon. The sky above him was the color of bruises, dark blue bleeding into burnt orange. Ash fire grazed nearby, tail swatting flies in lazy rhythm. All else was quiet, too quiet. The smell of black coffee and smoke filled the camp. It should have been peaceful, But Elias's gut told a different story. He stared at the canvas sack sitting just inside the tent, Fitch's gold, still unopened, still gleaming with promise and poison. He hadn't touched it since the saloon, but the weight of it was heavier than iron, heavier than a bullet. The crunch of hooves on gravel stirred him. A shadow rode in from the ridge. Clara. She dismounted without waiting for a greeting, dusting her skirts with one quick swipe. Her cheeks were flushed, hair wild from the ride. "You weren't easy to find," she said, stepping closer to the fire. Elias poured her a tin cup of coffee, handed it over without a word, then spooned a helping of beans into a battered bowl. Passed that too. Clara took it, eyeing him with something between frustration and concern. "You're out here cooking stew while Fitch's men tighten the noose." "I heard," Elias said. "Smoke talks louder than telegrams." She sat on an upturned crate across from him. "You need to choose a side, Elias." "I didn't come here to choose sides," he muttered. "Well, the sides chose you." They ate in silence for a while. Crickets chirped from the brush. The beans were hot, a little oversalted, but warm in the belly. The coffee was thick, dark, bitter as regret. Clara set her bowl down. "The Reverend says you've got a good heart. That's rare in this part of the world." "Good hearts don't last long out here," Elias said. "They get stomped, burned, or buried." "But they still matter." Her voice softened. "You saved that boy. You stood your ground. People are watching." Elias looked into the fire, the flames dancing like ghosts. "If I pick the wrong side, folks die. If I pick the right one, I might be first." "Then die standing," Clara said. "Better than living on your knees." The wind shifted. A new scent rode in with it. Horses, leather, sweat. The unmistakable stink of men ready for violence. Elias stood. Far off, over the rise, shadows appeared. Riders, many, riding hard, dust trailing like a funeral train. Clara rose too, face pale but eyes sharp. "Fitch?" "No one else travels in packs like that." Ashfire neighed nervously, hooves pawing at the dry ground. Elias turned to Clara, voice low. "If I choose, there might be no turning back." "Then don't wait too long," she said, mounting her horse. He watched her ride off, her figure swallowed by the rising dusk. The gold still sat in the tent, untouched, but not unseen. The wind howled again, louder now, and the riders kept coming. Elias rode alone into the Apache camp beneath a sky cracked with red and rust. The sun had dipped low behind the hills, bleeding color across the dust-choked plains. He carried no weapon. His hands were open at his sides. It was the only way this would work. Ashfire's hooves made no sound on the dry earth. The wind was quiet. Even the cicadas seemed to hold their breath. Smoke curled from low fires in the center of the camp. Women packed bundles of cornmeal and woven blankets. Men sharpened spears and checked bows. The children were unusually silent, clinging to their mothers' skirts or peeking out from behind makeshift tents. The entire place had the feeling of a storm waiting to burst. A few warriors spotted Elias and stood, hands instinctively gripping knives or bows. But no arrows flew. No one moved closer. Word of him had spread, and not all of it was bad. At the center fire, Chayton stood like a stone figure carved from old rage. His braids were tight, his chest bare beneath beaded leather. Taza sat beside him, older, quieter, the smoke dancing across his deeply lined face. Elias dismounted, slow and respectful. He walked toward them with deliberate steps, stopping just short of the fire. He nodded. I came to talk. Chayton didn't blink. We sharpen spears, not words. I'm not here to fight. Then turn around. You'll bring trouble. Elias glanced at the women behind the warriors, loading ponchos onto old pack horses. He spoke loud enough for all to hear. Fitch is moving. His men are riding through Coyote Ridge, armed, drunk on gold and blood. That brought murmurs. Even Chayton's eyes flickered. Taza stood slowly. You bring news of death. I bring a warning, Elias said, and a plea. Move the women and children. Get them out while there's still time. Chayton stepped forward. You think we are weak? I think you are warriors, Elias said, and warriors protect what matters. The fire popped. Sparks jumped into the air, briefly lighting their faces with flickers of orange. You speak like one of us, Taza said softly. Chayton scoffed. He speaks like a coward. Elias's voice dropped, steady but firm. No, I know what cowardice looks like. It hides behind gold and rifles, like Fitch. What I bring is truth. If you fight, and I know you will, let the women and children live to remember it. Taza stepped between them, looking at Chayton. He speaks from the blood. I owe him my life, so I lend him my voice. Chayton turned to the fire, jaw tight, silent for a long moment. Then, without turning, he spoke. The women and the young will go north, before moonrise. Elias let out the breath he'd been holding. But Chayton wasn't finished. You, Boone, you are not one of us. But if you stand here when blood falls, then you are no longer just a man. Elias met his eyes. If you fall, I fall beside you. Taza stepped forward and reached into his pouch. From it, he drew a smooth, flat stone, wrapped in thin deer hide, and carved with a simple spiral. He placed it in Elias's palm. This is a warrior's stone, he said, carried by those who defend, not conquer. Today, I name you friend of the Apache, a warrior of honor. Elias held the stone tightly. No words came. Just then a young scout burst through the eastern brush, breathless, his shirt clinging to his ribs. They're coming, the boy gasped. Fitch's riders. 20 or more. They're already at Coyote Ridge. The fire snapped again. The wind shifted. Chayton looked toward the blackening horizon. So be it, he said. Elias turned to his horse, slipping the warrior's stone into his pocket. There would be no more warnings, only choices and consequences. The wind howled low through the narrow gorge of Coyote Ridge, swirling the crimson dust into coils that danced like spirits of the dead. The walls of the canyon stood like ancient tombstones, their jagged edges cloaked in wisps of morning mist. Elias Boone knelt behind a cluster of boulders near the canyon's mouth, fingers tracing the carved surface of the stone talisman hanging from his neck. The Apache had called it a shield for the soul. Today, he would test whether spirits watched over men, or merely watched them fall. In his saddlebag lay 6 sticks of dynamite wrapped tight in oilcloth, their fuses short and cruel. He had learned just enough from old miners to know where to wedge them. The plan was crude, brutal, but so was war. As he worked, he replayed Taza's words, "If you fall, fall as one who feeds the land." He could almost hear the fire crackling at the Apache camp again, smell the roasted venison and herb spirits. Now all he could smell was the metallic sting of dust, sweat, and the cold stink of fear in his own throat. A hawk screeched above, slicing through the stillness. Then the thunder of hooves shattered the quiet. Fitch's riders, a swarm of shadows with rifles and bandoliers, began filing into the canyon. At the front rode Crowley, stiff-backed and grinning like a man heading to a wedding. Elias took position, lit the fuse. The canyon answered with thunder. A roar shook the ridge. Stone exploded outward in a deafening crash, sending slabs of granite tumbling down like judgment from the heavens. Men screamed. Horses reared, twisted, and were crushed. A cloud of dust billowed up so thick it turned noon into dusk. Then, from the swirling chaos, a figure emerged, half man, half myth. Elias rode Ashfire straight through the smoke, twin pistols raised. He shot clean, quick, and without hesitation. A man fell from his saddle. Another clutched his chest, crumpling. Ashfire shrieked, hooves pounding stone, her mane streaked with soot and blood. Crowley's voice tore through the madness. "Boone!" Their eyes met for a blink in the red haze. Crowley's face twisted, not in fear but fury. "You bastard traitor!" he bellowed. "He's ours! Kill him!" Gunfire answered. Bullets zipped past Elias like angry wasps. He leaned low, Ashfire zigzagging through the rocks as if she too sensed death breathing down her neck. The canyon became a graveyard of echoing shots and splintered rock. Elias fired until his guns clicked empty, then turned the mare hard and vanished back into the mist. Behind him, Crowley's voice chased him like a curse. "He betrayed us! Bury him!" But in that moment, amidst the ash and dust and screams, Elias was more shadow than flesh. To those left behind, he looked less like a man than a ghost. Ashfire's piercing whinny echoed through the canyon, long and sharp like a prophecy spoken in a dying breath. The dust had not yet settled. Coyote Ridge still trembled beneath the weight of its own collapse, the jagged cliffs coughing ash into a sky turned murky gray. Stone cracked and shifted like bones grinding underfoot. Where there had been men, now there were only sprawled limbs, blood-soaked dust, and screams echoing off canyon walls. Elias moved like a ghost through it all, smoke curling around his shoulders, pistol firm in hand, the Apache talisman thudding lightly against his chest. He remembered Clara's voice, soft but sharp, like a church bell before a storm. "Stand on the side of justice, even if it kills you." And now here he was, among the wreckage, among the dying. One rider staggered up from behind a fallen horse, his rifle lifted with a trembling hand. Elias fired. The man dropped without a word. Another tried to run, limping along the ridge's edge. Elias didn't hesitate. Another shot, another body. He wasn't counting anymore. Ashfire galloped past, ears pinned, blood streaked down her flank. Just a graze, but Elias's gut clenched at the sight. He whistled low. She circled back, wild-eyed, snorting smoke and pain. More gunfire, then a sound different from the rest. A bellow, raw and vicious. Crowley. He came at Elias like a charging bull, revolver blazing in one hand, knife gleaming in the other. Elias dove to the side, rolled behind a split boulder. Bullets chipped stone, spat sparks. "Come on, Boone!" Crowley roared. "Come out and die like a man!" Elias answered with 2 quick shots. One missed, the other grazed Crowley's arm, slicing fabric and flesh. But the man didn't flinch. He laughed, deep, guttural, unhinged. "Justice?" Crowley snarled, lunging. "You think you're some savior? You're nothing. Just a roadblock to destiny." They collided hard, dust exploding around them. Elias's pistol went flying. Crowley's knife slashed, nicking Elias's coat. Elias swung a fist, catching Crowley's jaw. The outlaw staggered, then slammed a shoulder into Elias, knocking him back against the rocks. They grappled in the gravel, grunting, punching, biting like cornered animals. Crowley's blade came down. Elias caught his wrist, muscles straining. Sweat stung his eyes. The knife hovered inches from his throat. Then a shot rang out. One of Crowley's men, firing blind through the haze. The bullet struck the rock beside them, throwing sparks. Both men broke apart, panting, bloodied, stumbling. Crowley wiped blood from his split lip, eyes burning. "You should have taken the gold," he hissed. "Could have lived like a king." Elias spat in the dirt. "I'd rather die clean." Crowley chuckled, no joy in it, just madness. Then, without another word, he turned and ran, back into the smoke, into the ruins of what he'd hoped would be conquest. His boots kicked up red dust as he vanished between the stones. But his laughter remained. It echoed across the ridge, sharp and feral, like the howl of a wounded wolf. It clung to the air long after his shadow disappeared. Elias stood alone, chest heaving. Ashfire limped toward him, her sides heaving, one leg stained red. He dropped to one knee beside her, running a trembling hand along her neck. "Easy now," he whispered. "You held strong, girl. You got me through." She whinnied low, leaning into him. The smoke began to thin. The ridge was quiet, but somewhere in the distance, justice still waited to be reckoned. With blood or with mercy. Elias didn't know which, not yet, but he was still standing. And that meant the fight wasn't over. The wind whistled through the seams of the old deerskin tent, tugging at the flaps like cold fingers. Inside, a small fire burned low, its smoke curling upward in thin, bitter streams, mingling with the scent of crushed sage and juniper bark. Taza sat cross-legged, his eyes heavy with time, watching the flames as if searching for answers in their flicker. The lines on his face looked deeper tonight, carved by worry more than age. Elias sat across from him, arms resting on his knees, shoulders aching from battle. The talisman at his neck felt heavier than usual, soaked with ash and blood. Clara leaned over a wounded Apache warrior, carefully wrapping fresh linen around a seeping wound. Her hands moved, gently, but with a firmness born of urgency. Around her, a few of the tribe's women watched in silence, not yet friends, but no longer enemies. Trust, it seemed, was beginning to grow in the soil of shared suffering. The tent flap rustled again. Chaitin entered with a scowl dark as thunderclouds. In his grip was a young man, blond and bruised, wrists bound tight with sinew cord. "One of Fitch's scouts," Chaitin growled. "We found him near the water lines." He shoved the prisoner to his knees. The young man looked barely 20, his eyes wide with fear and shame. "He saw too much. We should spill his blood before he can carry it back." "No," Elias said, rising to his feet. "He's not armed. Not now." He wears the mark of our enemy, Chaitin snapped. He is the enemy. Elias stepped forward, his voice calm but unwavering. Then let him stand trial for his crimes, but not murder a defenseless boy in the dark. Chaitin stared hard, but it was Taza who raised his hand. Enough, the elder said. The flames crackled between them. Taza's voice was quiet, but it filled the space. Blood has been spilled, yes, but justice must be louder than vengeance, or we become the very beasts we fight. Chaitin turned away, teeth grinding, but said no more. Clara finished tying the bandage and stood, wiping her hands on her skirt. "There's more coming," she said. "I heard it in town. Fitch is not backing down. He's buying more men, mercenaries, gun hands, anyone who'll take his coin." Elias exhaled slowly. The battle at Coyote Ridge had been just a prelude. The real storm was still gathering. Taza looked at him for a long moment. His eyes seemed to pierce through bone. "You walk the line between two worlds, Elias Boone," he said. "The land feels it. The wind knows it. You have spilled blood for the right reasons, but every drop stains you." Elias nodded. "I know." "No," Taza said, shaking his head. "You do not." He leaned forward, gripping a charred stick and drawing a spiral in the dust. "This land has chosen you. But the land is not kind. It does not care for names or hearts, only deeds. And it always asks for payment." The fire popped. Taza's eyes held steady on Elias's. "The price will be high." Elias felt the weight of it settle on his chest like an iron yoke. He didn't speak. There was nothing to say. Outside, a distant sound rose over the plain. A low, haunting horn. A war call carried on the prairie wind. It came from the direction of Dry Creek. The tent fell into silence. Clara placed a hand on Elias's arm, her touch light but grounding. Taza closed his eyes and murmured something in Apache, words older than memory. Chaitin, still tense, turned toward the tent flap and muttered, "Then let it come." The fire dimmed, flickering low, and the horn kept calling. Dry Creek had never known true silence until now. The saloon doors, once swinging with every burst of laughter and fiddle tune, now hung crooked, stilled by fear. The old piano lay shattered, its keys stained with beer and dust, as if the town's joy had been hammered flat by boot heels and gun butts. Fitch's men, mercenaries with dead eyes and louder mouths, lined the streets like vultures on fence posts. Their uniforms mismatched, badges borrowed or forged, but their allegiance was clear. Everywhere the black banner bearing Fitch's crooked star flapped in the dry wind. Where a sheriff's office once stood, a gallows now rose. Quickly built, purposefully ominous. Inside the saloon, tables had been pushed together into a long, crude feast. Tin plates scraped with greasy hands. Smoke hung thick from cigars and roasted meat. Crowley laughed too loud, chewing with his mouth open, slamming whiskey like water. Around him, men elbowed and belched, toasting to conquest. Rough-cut beef, charred cornmeal, and salt pork filled the room with a stench of excess. Barrels of rye whiskey were cracked open and poured into whatever container a man could lift. "Here's to Fitch's law!" someone shouted, and the room erupted in grunts and cheers. Fitch stood apart, near the window, silent. His gloved hands rested behind his back as he looked out onto Main Street. The Reverend walked slowly down the center of it, his spine straight, his black coat flapping like a flag of resistance. Clara followed close behind, face pale but resolved. Around them, townsfolk watched from behind curtains, afraid to speak. Fitch turned as Crowley rose, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. "The preacher's here to whine again," Crowley said. "Shall we teach him to kneel?" Fitch didn't answer. He just nodded once. Crowley grinned. Outside, the Reverend stopped in front of the saloon. "This town," he said, voice loud and clear, "is not yours to claim, nor is the valley. This land belongs to its people, not to thieves and killers." This mercenaries laughed. Crowley stepped onto the boardwalk and looked the old man over. "You preach fire, old man. Let's see if you burn." He backhanded the Reverend hard across the face. The crack of bone echoed like a shot. Clara screamed and rushed forward, placing herself between them. "Enough!" she cried. "He's unarmed!" Crowley grabbed her by the arm, squeezing until she winced. "You want to protect him? Then you'll stay close." Fitch finally stepped forward, slow and deliberate. "Take her," he said coldly. "We need leverage." Crowley dragged Clara inside. She struggled, kicking, shouting, but it was no use. Two men grabbed her, tied her hands, and shoved her into the storeroom behind the bar. The Reverend lay in the dirt, groaning, blood trailing from his mouth. No one helped him. Fitch stepped out onto the porch, his voice calm but cutting. "This town is under my command. Any resistance will be met with force. The valley of Rio Seco is mine by right, won by coin and conviction. Anyone who stands against me will be dealt with accordingly." He raised his hand, and behind him, a row of men stepped forward, rifles in hand. Dry Creek was no longer just a frontier town. It was a base camp for conquest. And Clara, its heart, had just been taken hostage. The moon hung high and solemn over the Apache burial grounds, its pale light tracing silver edges along the wooden eagle totems planted in the earth. The feathers carved into each post whispered of warriors past, their spirits now part of the wind. The air smelled of pine smoke, dry sage, and the silence of sacrifice. Elias stood alone at the foot of a fresh grave. The mound of earth was still soft, covered with hand-picked stones, each etched with quiet reverence. Beside the grave, a small bowl of ashes smoldered, incense curling up toward the stars. The name of the fallen had not been spoken since the burial. It was Apache custom. But Elias knew him, knew the look in his eyes when the bullets came, knew the way he shielded a younger warrior with his body, taking the lead in defense of his home. Chayton stepped forward from the shadows, his face unreadable in the flickering torchlight. "He died with honor," Chayton said. Elias didn't reply right away. He knelt slowly beside the grave, brushing his fingers along the edge of the nearest totem. His voice, when it came, was low but firm. "If I fall, let them bury me here," he said, "with him, with the ones who gave everything." Chayton's brows furrowed. "You are not of our blood." Elias turned his head, meeting the warrior's eyes. "No, but I've bled beside you. That counts for something." There was a long silence between them, filled only by the wind weaving through the cypress. Finally, Chayton placed a hand on Elias's shoulder. "Then you are my blood now. Brother not by birth, but by fire." From the edge of the burial ground, the old man Taza approached, wrapped in a ceremonial blanket, bones creaking with each step. In his hands he carried a bundle wrapped in deerskin. He unwrapped it before Elias. Inside lay a short bow of carved mesquite, a quiver of hand-fletched arrows, and a blade with an obsidian edge, dark and gleaming like night water. "This belonged to my brother," Taza said. "He died many seasons ago, protecting this land. Take it now. It is yours if you accept what it means." Elias looked down at the weapons, then back at the old man. "What does it mean?" "That you are no longer just a man," Taza said. "You are a warrior, and warriors die for more than themselves." Elias picked up the blade. Its handle fit his hand as if it had always been waiting for him. He stood and turned back to the grave. "I will not run," he said. "If justice demands my life, it shall have it." He placed his palm gently on the mound of dirt. The soil was warm from the day's sun, and yet the weight of it felt cold, as if already reaching for him. "I will fall if I must, but not before I make this right." Chayton crossed his arms, nodding once. There was respect in his stance now, not just tolerance, the kind that only men who've stood under fire could understand. Just then, from beyond the ridge, a distant sound shattered the quiet. A trumpet, sharp and metallic, echoed across the valley. Taza looked to the west. "They are coming." Elias sheathed the obsidian blade. The oath had been made. Now the reckoning would follow. Dust rolled across the open plains like a tide of rust-colored fog. The thundering hooves of horses and the heavy boots of marching men drummed the earth with a steady, ominous rhythm. From the ridge above, it looked like the land itself was bleeding smoke. The army of Fitch had come. Men rode shoulder to shoulder in long, uneven lines. Mercenaries with crude rifles, ragged hats, and eyes empty of loyalty. Behind them, wagons rattled under the weight of stolen supplies and crates of ammunition. Black banners flapped from spear shafts. The crooked star of Fitch's empire silhouetted against the noon sun. At the center of the procession, bound by thick rope and guarded by two grim-faced riders, sat Clara. She was tied atop a worn mule, wrists chafed and face drawn, but her spine was straight. Her hair clung to her face, damp with sweat and grit. Still she held her head high. She had not begged. She had not wept. Crowley rode beside her, grinning like a devil. "She's our insurance," he barked at the men nearby, "in case that damn cowboy still thinks he's got fight in him." Some of the soldiers laughed. Others averted their eyes. Among the crowd, townsfolk from Dry Creek were herded like cattle, their hands raised, eyes wide with fear. Fitch's men had dragged them from their homes, using them now as a human shield, a wall of flesh and fear in front of the advancing troops. From the high ridge overlooking the valley, Elias crouched behind a rock outcrop, ash fire steady beside him. His fingers curled tightly around the Apache stone charm that hung from his neck. He saw Clara. Even from a distance, he recognized the way she scanned the hills, searching, hoping. And then her eyes found him. For one breathless moment, they held each other's gaze. She did not cry out, but her lips moved. "Help me." Elias swallowed hard. His breath caught in his chest. Rage and grief twisted through him like twin flames. The valley of Rio Seco lay ahead, still, golden, defenseless. Behind him, in the shadows of the cliffs, Apache warriors waited, silent, painted, ready. Chayton was among them, his spear grounded, but his spirit sharp. Every man had chosen to stand, but Elias would lead them. He rose slowly from the rocks, the charm still clutched in his hand. Crowley's voice echoed faintly across the plains, mocking and cruel. "Come out, Boone, or I'll start sending bodies back to you one by one." Elias didn't flinch. He slipped the charm under his shirt, adjusted the rifle strapped across his back, and whispered to Ashfire, "Not long now, old friend." The horse whinnied low, as if it understood. As the dust cloud crept closer to the edge of the valley, the sun began to dip, casting long, jagged shadows across the land. It would not be long. Justice had no army. It had no cannon. But it had men like Elias Boone. And soon it would speak. Dust and sun had melted into one molten haze. The valley of Rio Seco seethed like a cast-iron skillet over an unforgiving fire. The high canyon walls echoed with the thrum of distant drums, Apache war chants, steady and fierce. Elias crouched behind a ridge of jagged stone, eyes fixed on the advancing horde below. His fingers gripped the worn leather of his rifle stock, and beside him, Chayton drew an arrow slowly, the tip glinting like a fang. "Now," Elias whispered. From the cliffs and crevices, Apache warriors rose like ghosts. A rain of arrows sliced through the shimmering heat, falling silent and deadly. Horses reared, men screamed. Panic cracked the ranks of Fitch's mercenaries. "Ambush!" someone bellowed. "Shoot everything that moves!" Fitch roared from his saddle, face contorted with fury. He pulled his pistol and fired into the sky, rallying his men. "Kill them all!" "Burn it to the ground if you must." Gunfire erupted like hail on tin. Smoke twisted into the air, and the clean scent of sage turned into the reek of blood and sulfur. In the chaos, Elias charged. Ashfire galloped straight through the gunfire, weaving between stunned soldiers and fallen wagons. Bullets whizzed past his ears, one grazing the saddle. He caught sight of Clara, still tied, still guarded. But then Crowley emerged. He strode through the bloodied path like a man born for war, his coat dusted with ash, eyes gleaming. He pointed straight at Elias and roared, "That horse is mine!" Elias yanked the reins. Ashfire stopped hard. Crowley fired. The shot struck the ground inches from Ashfire's hoof. The stallion reared, screaming. Elias leapt from the saddle before Ashfire bolted and rolled behind a low stone. He returned fire. His bullet clipped Crowley's arm, but the bastard kept coming, face twisted in hate. They met halfway between the burning brush and the wounded earth. No more bullets, no more words, just fists and fury. Crowley lunged with a blade, slashing across Elias's side. Elias grunted, tackled him into the mud. They rolled, kicked, cursed, the world around them a blur of fire and cries. Ashfire's shriek cut through it all, a sound of pain and rage. Elias's heart clenched. He turned his head just enough to see the stallion limp through the smoke, blood trailing from its flank. Crowley took the chance. With a guttural roar, he straddled Elias, drove his knife down. But Elias caught his wrist, muscles trembling under the strain. The blade hovered inches above his throat. "You were never meant to be more than dust," Crowley hissed. "Just another shadow in the sun." Elias's legs shifted beneath the muck. He drove his knee upward, knocking Crowley off balance. But the knife slipped, its edge grazing skin. Clara's voice rang out faintly. "Elias!" It gave him just enough strength. But Crowley wasn't done. With both men sprawled in the blood-slick mud, Crowley grabbed Elias's collar, knife pressed again to his neck. His eyes were wild, his grin feral, the air filled with Apache war cries and the heart-wrenching wail of a child crying somewhere behind the smoke. The land wept, the valley bled, and Elias Boone stared into the eyes of the man who might end it all. The last shots echoed through the valley like a funeral drum. Smoke hung thick in the air, gray and choking, turning the noonday sun into a pale ghost behind the haze. Bodies lay strewn across the battlefield, men and beasts alike, limbs tangled, blood soaking the cracked earth. Elias Boone staggered to his feet. His shirt clung to him with blood, some his, some not. His hands trembled around the pistol still warm from fire. Across the field, Crowley pushed off a fallen horse, his eyes feral, the long knife in his hand, dripping with the morning's violence. Their eyes locked. Crowley sneered. "It's always been you or me, Boone." Elias didn't answer. There was no room left for words. They came at each other one last time, flesh and steel and fury colliding under the watchful eyes of gods who'd long stopped caring. Crowley lunged, blade slicing through the air. Elias sidestepped, caught his arm, drove his elbow into Crowley's jaw. The knife dropped into the dust. Crowley grabbed Elias's throat. Elias shoved his knee into the bastard's gut, broke free, and with one clean movement swung the butt of his pistol against Crowley's skull. The man reeled. Elias didn't wait. He raised the gun, pointed it at Crowley's chest, and pulled the trigger. The crack of the shot silenced the wind. Crowley dropped to his knees, blinking like a child too stubborn to believe the end had come. Then he fell forward, face first, into the blood-soaked dirt. Elias swayed. Ashfire limped into view behind him, flanks stained with mud and smoke. Somewhere in the haze, Clara screamed. "Elias!" Fitch appeared like a snake slithering from the brush, revolver raised. His face was a mask of fury and fear. He aimed straight for Clara, who was rushing toward Elias. Elias didn't think. He stepped between them. The shot cracked. Pain bloomed like fire in his ribs. His knees gave way, and he dropped to the ground, arms still outstretched as if trying to hold the air itself in place. Clara dropped beside him, catching his head in her lap. "Elias, no, 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 stay with me," she cried, pressing her hands to the wound. His breath came in shudders. He reached up, fingers brushing her cheek. "You're safe," he whispered. "That's all that matters." Fitch cocked his gun again, taking aim at them both. A war cry tore through the smog. Chayton emerged from the smoke like a vengeful spirit, spear raised high. He hurled it with every ounce of rage his soul could muster. The weapon flew true. It struck Fitch square in the chest. The mercenary's eyes went wide as he stumbled backward, then crumpled to the ground lifeless. The revolver dropped from his hand, a useless piece of iron. The battlefield fell quiet. Clara held Elias tighter as his blood soaked into her dress. His skin was pale, but his eyes, those weary, storm-gray eyes, still held fire. "You did it," she whispered. He shook his head slowly. "We did. All of us." Clara pressed her forehead to his. Tears streamed down her cheeks. Around them the Apache chanted a slow, solemn hymn, a song of warriors and farewells. Elias's voice was barely a breath now. Justice. Don't die. Then silence. Clara let out a sob that shattered the quiet. Chayton stood behind her, eyes solemn, hand over his heart. He looked down at Elias, no longer the outsider, no longer the man in the middle. Now he was one of them. The little stone talisman Taza had given Elias slipped from his hand, and for a moment, just a moment, it glowed faintly, catching the dying light. The rains came late that year, but they came. Where once the cracked earth split beneath hooves and boots, now grass whispered softly in the breeze. Rio Seco, long starved and parched, flowed once more with a calm, glistening stream. The water ran clear, so clear one could see the stones beneath it, smooth as old bones, unmoved by time. On a gentle slope beside the river, beneath the shade of an old juniper tree, a wooden cross stood freshly planted. Flowers, wild, untrimmed, the kind that needed no gardener, grew at its base. They hadn't been placed in neat bundles, but scattered with care, as if each bloom was a memory laid down. Clara knelt there in silence. She didn't weep. She had no tears left. Instead, she gently placed a sprig of yellow prairie flower against the base of the cross and whispered, "You kept your word, Elias." Behind her, the town of Dry Creek stood, not broken, but changed. Soldiers were gone. The flags bearing Fitch's mark had been burned. What remained were the townsfolk, the children, the elders, and the stubborn bits of life that refused to bow, even to fire. The funeral had drawn them all, Apache and settler alike. A rare sight, almost mythic. Varon Malcolm stood beside the grave, his Bible clutched tight in one hand, the wind ruffling his pages as he read. Greater love hath no man than this, that he lay down his life for his friends. Taza, elder of the Apache, stepped forward once the words had faded into the wind. He held no book, only a drum and voice. From deep in his chest rose a chant, low, ancient, and filled with the weight of 1,000 stories untold. It was not sorrowful. It was a song of honor, of crossing from this life into the next. Chayton stood with arms crossed, head bowed. He wore no feathers, no war paint, just a leather string around his neck, holding the carved stone Elias once carried. When the song ended, Chayton turned to the gathered crowd. His voice cut through the hush. "This man," he said, "was no Apache, but his blood now lives in this land like ours. He died not for gold, nor land, nor pride, but for something no bullet can kill." He paused, then added, "The cowboy's soul guards this valley still." And no one doubted it. The sun began to dip below the ridges. One by one, people turned and walked back toward the town, leaving behind only the sound of the stream and the wind in the grass. Clara stayed a moment longer, fingers brushing the stone at the foot of the cross. Then she stood, kissed her fingertips, and pressed them to the wood. "I'll see you in the quiet," she whispered. Night fell gently over Rio Seco. Later, when the moon was high and round, and coyotes howled far from the hills, someone swore they saw a figure on horseback riding along the edge of the water. He was tall in the saddle, hat pulled low, coat trailing like smoke behind him. The horse beneath him, black as pitch, moved like it remembered every inch of the land it now protected. Some called it nonsense, a trick of the light.
Others claimed it was Elias Boone keeping watch, ensuring the land stayed free, that justice remained rooted in more than just words or weapons. But no one dared mock it aloud, because legends, once born in blood and belief, don't die easy. And in Rio Seco, justice had found its price and its guardian. In the end, Elias Boone chose not the path of power or gold, but the path of justice, even if it cost him everything. His story reminds us that true courage isn't about surviving the battle, but choosing the right side when it matters most. Justice, like the Rio Seco stream, may dry up in times of fear, but it always returns when brave souls stand their ground. The soil remembers the blood of the righteous. If this story moved you, drop a fire in the comments to honor Elias. Which part hit you the hardest? Let's talk about it below. And if you love stories that make you feel, think, and remember, subscribe to True Wild West Stories so you never miss another tale like this one.